All right, welcome once again to everyone who's joined us. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day. I'm Daniel Pigeon. I'm product marketing at Cyberint, and with me is Gino Rumbly, who's a senior sales engineer based in the Netherlands. And today we are doing a webinar on uncovering the full extent of your organization's attack surface. So a couple housekeeping notes before I pass it off to Gino. First of all, we're recording the session just to let everyone know. We will share a link to the recording after this session is over, and we will also share a copy of the slides. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. We actually really love it when people ask questions. Where both Gino and I are here live with you. So if you ask questions along the way, we'll try to answer them as they come up. Otherwise, we will save about 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer any questions from the audience. So with that, Gino, I think I can go ahead and pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Daniel. We're about to kick off my presentation on Beyond Your Radar, uncovering the full extent of your organization's attack surface. So what we will cover in this webinar, we're gonna take you through a little bit recap of a little bit of history of what attack surface management is and what it is today, as most people know it. And then I'm going to look at the traditional attack surfaces approaches. So where we custom seeing what an ASM solution does today. And then I'm going to go over to what we've seen in the last 2 years as the top initial access vector. So where hackers are looking to attack organizations and where they're collecting these initial access access from different brokers. We'll focus on brand impersonation and phishing and InfoStealers, so to give you some example of initial attack vectors, and also data leakage and exposed credentials. And what we're going to also cover is something that's been very much what I would consider up and coming and have been not too much neglected, has been a bit neglected in the last couple of months, is supply chain attacks and third-party risks. And then finally, I'm just going to focus on how you can mitigate these risk strategies, and I'll open up for Q&A. So a little bit about me. As Danny introduced you, my name is Gino Rumbly. I have a master's in computer science and engineering, where I obtained at the University of Eindhoven, where I specialize in software engineering technology. I'm almost about 11, 12 years in the cybersecurity space. And when I first started my career, I focused a lot on identity and access management solutions, where I was a consultant and helping large enterprise organization manage their identities. So all their standard credentials and accounts for multiple applications and making sure they're safely stored in one solution. And I also work as a solution engineer for multiple threat intelligence platforms and vendors on the market today. In my current life, I am a senior pre-sales engineer, also threat intelligence strategist. I focus and discuss a lot with a lot of enterprise and MSSPs on how they can leverage threat intelligence, attack surface monitoring solution, digital risk in their current practice. And when I have time, I focus on ongoing research at night, where I put on my analyst hat and I focus on upcoming trends or new trends we're seeing in our data. So let me first take you through the introduction to attack surface management and why it is that it's suddenly become a lot more important in 2023. Now, a few years back, in 2021, Gartner released the hype cycle for security operations. And what you can see in this graph is that the external attack surface management solution is all the way to the bottom of the graph, where it's just under the innovation trigger. Now, many people might wonder, why was this all of a sudden this now begin to be innovation? Why was this now sudden to be now relevant? Now, the main question, the main issues of what we're seeing is that in 2021, which we were pretty much deep in the pandemic through the whole world, a lot of organizations had to shift the way they do business. All right. So a lot of organization employees were working remotely and needed access to solutions to do their work. And IT itself was already burdened that they had to provide, let's say, a new infrastructure, a new safe infrastructure for employees to work remotely and still access the key solutions in-house. Now, as we started to kind of, go through 2021 and 2022 rises, we see that the external attack surface management become more and more relevant. Big vendors out there that are known to stop cybersecurity breaches when in purchase a attack surface management solution, in order to kind of a scope to pretty much expand the scope of potential attack vectors. In other words, customers then were having assets that they were not aware of. No, all of this, right, led to what we've seen as the top trend in 2022, right? Gartner predicted that attack surface expansion will become more and more important. And the reason, more or less, why it become more important than all the other ones was the fact that when you were starting to use a solution, right, and just think of a solution, the SaaS solution that you wanted to do your work efficiently. Instead of going to the IT, you search or you did a Google search, you saw an application, you could do it, you could register with your Gmail account or with your corporate account, and within minutes you had access to the solution. And a lot of organizations started to leverage those type of solutions. So for example, Zoom, right? It was a hype. Other different ways to do conferences became different, right? Instead of relying for the traditional IT support team to give you access to our application, then in turn you access Zoom. Now, what led to this, and not only that users leverage other solutions using the corporate credentials, customers or the companies itself face another challenge where they had to accelerate the digital transformation. And Satya Nadella said it before that down the line, every company is going to be a software company. So all the companies that were traditionally doing business, the old matter or let's say traditional way of doing business, realize that, hey, we need to leverage more solutions to understand where the demand is coming from so that we can be very agile and shift left or shift right whenever it's necessary. Now, what this led to? More domains, more websites. More teams start to acquire more domains to launch new products, new services. More devices were reduced. So before, when you used to go to the office, it will be your laptop and your mobile phone. What now has turned into, when you work remotely, you have your laptop, you have your iPad, you have your mobile telephone, and as well, if you're leveraging cloud solutions, you have those virtual machines and other solutions. More applications, as I explained. So think on using some SaaS apps in order to do your work, to be more productive. And of course, if you're running domains, you have IP addresses. So more and more and more, what has happened is that you have more data to protect. And a lot of organizations, particularly the IT and the security operation, didn't expect this to be explosion of new assets. So what you see here, and this is very interesting, is that Forrester shows that from the decision makers ranking complexity, both in 2022, on average, attack surface managed tools discover only 30% of cloud assets than security and IT teams even know that they have. So just simply put it, you can't secure what you don't know. So a lot of organizations, as they start to accelerate the digital transformation, they tend to look at cloud solutions because they were easy accessible. To access a data center required a lot of, let's say, third-party assistance, where you had to be physically present, which was difficult to do in the pandemic. So cloud became more and more easy to use, and a lot more organizations started to leverage cloud. Now, what you see here is that a lot of organizations were not aware of their cloud assets. In other words, they thought in their mind, okay, from the IT department, we have, let's say, Azure, where we spin up our assets, but they were not aware that another person in the organization used the same corporate credentials to create and spin up a AWS environment. So those are things where with the cloud SaaS platform and infrastructure as service, You can, as long as you have a credit card, you can just log in, create a sign up for our account, and tag your enter your credit card and spin up assets that you want. It's only when, for example, account manager from one of these infrastructure service company reach you and say, wait a minute, we do see two people from your organization are using our cloud services. Wouldn't you want to consider, like, consolidating it under one bill? That's when most IT teams start to find out that there are other organizations, other teams in the department are using cloud services. So this is just to show you exactly an example where people were missing. Now, overall, and then going back here, right, is pretty much what the traditional ASM traditional approaches to ASM are. We have here, and I'm just going to just touch on this here for a minute. The layers of attack surface. So the top layer, as you can see, managed assets, are the ones that we're talking about, what the traditional ASM solutions are able to find, right? Your endpoints, your servers, networks, mobile websites. Now, what the traditional assets are struggling to find out is the shadow ITs, right? I spin up a asset on the cloud infrastructure using my corporate email address, but my colleagues don't have a view on that particular asset that I spinned up, or cloud stores, test data, cloud response stories as GitHub. All of these here, unused credentials, unknown assets, are areas where the traditional ASM seem to miss. Then you have third-party assets, right? Contractors that are coming in, host data, JavaScript, cloud services, APIs as well. And then you have the hyperamical assets, right? I can have a virtual machine running on my system. I have some development environments that I can be running, short-lived cloud assets, right, that I spin up and down. And of course, my bring your own device services. All in all, here, just explaining you here about bad actors, where they can target. They know the top layer that you're managing, but there are other areas they know that you're not too strong of because it's outsourced to a different party, and that's where they're going to target. So what we see, what are the challenges to ASM product address is shadow IT. I spin up a new infrastructure, or I spin up a new infrastructure that I'm not aware of. And without these infrastructure, with a new domains that were deployed without authorization. So I'm not aware of it. Unmanaged assets, right? All servers that have been forgotten. Someone forgot that they were still running. Unpatched software, outdated software that has exportable CVEs that a team is not aware of. Misconfiguration, which can happen in most times when you're leveraging a cloud infrastructure, and security errors that leads to remote access and ports left open. Now, all of these here, right? This is where ASM pretty much focus on, right? It continuously discovers your internal IT infrastructure, identify new risks. These are the areas where it's pretty much known for taking these challenges. And what we see here is that the traditional ASM solutions pretty much just look on what they can know of. So in other words, they only focus on what I've shown here as the managed assets. The unknown assets, they tend to fail on, because what you see is that there's a lot more shift in where we collect information from. So think again, for example, I'm using AWS as a service, right? If I'm using the assets on that cloud infrastructure, I can find it. But if I'm using a SaaS platform like Salesforce, I have a couple of employees that are using their corporate credentials to access Salesforce, but I don't manage Salesforce. I can manage their login, right? But I can, that's much as I can do. But in terms of, who else can register to Salesforce or any other SaaS application, that's where the blind spot comes with the ASM. So with ASM, they're perfectly good in finding discovery and finding, making an inventory of your assets. They're very good in validating those assets and check for vulnerabilities, at that moment from that particular asset and say, this particular CV It shows you access of risk of issues and prioritize them of remediation. Like these are things that need to be done. But if you look at the more further, deeper details to say this particular asset, even though this has a particular CV, what are the priority we should set this asset to be patched? The CV has a high score, perfect. But is there any intelligence that we can add towards the CV in order to further enhance the prioritizing of this particular asset in our list? The answer is no. So where you see with traditional ASM solutions where they fall short is that they're not able to give you that further, let's say, intelligence or not intelligence led in a way that they can capture information and make good, solidified decisions that the business are moving more quicker and faster to eliminate any risk to their organization. Any points you want to raise about this, Daniel? Anything on your one you want to add on this?
No, so far I think everything is really clear. I'll check and see if we have any questions from the audience. So far, it doesn't look like we do. But again, everyone, feel free to ask questions along the way if any come up.
So what we've seen now, right, is why ASM focus on being built to focus only on your managed assets, to the ones you own. Hackers are now looking for different ways to target those assets. And they've become very clever in looking at the unmanaged assets. In other words, the assets that you, even though you know about them, but you only have the hardly control of targeting. Pretty much, you don't have control of managing them. So what we see here, attackers are looking for is initial access. And where they're looking to get this initial access, again, is through simple credentials. Credentials that they can collect through malware or any source of ways of to think on, for example, phishing, right? Phishing campaigns that are being being used to exploit or to collect the credentials from customers and employees. And then you have exploited CVEs. So that area of exploited CVEs is where you see the most attack vectors. Now, that particular part is where the traditional ASM were able to cover. But when it comes to botnets, phishing, and leak credentials, that's where they fall short. So the hackers are now looking at other areas to target those managed assets by looking at the unmanaged assets and try to collect the credentials from the employees, or through phishing by impersonating the business or an employee to say, hey, can you share, click on this link where you might fall the trap and then enter your corporate credentials. Now, what you see in all of this is what has become very costly for the initial access being costly vectors for the business is the business email compromise, phishing, right? We're talking about 4.8 million in terms of business email compromise being done. We're seeing 4.9 million businesses are losing, average cost on phishing. Vulnerability in third-party software is $4.5 million. And here, stolen credentials is also around about 4.5. So these top initial vectors on the upper areas where the hackers are looking to target an organization, that's where you're not able to get a lot. So these become very, very important. So when we look at these pretty much these attack vectors, we have to break them down in different categories to focus where in part they become very important. So where the traditional ASM solutions overlook, and most of the time in these major attack vectors, is the brand impersonation, right? I have a website where I'm pretending, or a social media webpage when I'm pretending to be a VIP of an organization, and I'm fooling people to enter or share the information with me, all right? Phishing attacks, right? These are all fall in different categories of digital risk protection. But again, if I have a website and that website source code is being copied on a phishing website, that is my data being stolen, or let's say used or exposed towards a phishing attack. And those are areas where my attack surface management is not going to detect, because it's not able to quickly see, traditional ASM is not going to look to see, okay, I manage these assets. Can I come up with some clever algorithm to think of what are potential new assets that could be generated that can look similar to my corporate assets that I can detect in advance, or pretty much purchase in advance and make that part of my assets. Malware infection, right? These are areas where traditional ASM doesn't look at. Data leakage and stolen credentials, another point that they don't like. Supply chain attacks. So you see where the areas ASM falls short. Now, when we look at brand impersonation, what we want to explain to our customers is that with brand impersonation, there's a few things you want to keep in mind when you talk about brand, because it's something that's always being overlooked. So when it comes to brand impersonation, there's simple things that people or hackers may look to do to impersonate your brand. Now, first thing off is lookalike domains. If I have a domain, for example, google.com, a threat actor might be clever enough to say, let's purchase, Google with one O.com, so google.com. Or let's see if we can purchase Google with a zero in it. Or let's see if we can purchase Google Sites, for example. So things that likes or look similar to your brand, the hackers are tending to look to register these lookalike domains and run phishing sites on these lookalike domains by copying the code of your website to lure your customers or employees to fill in information that they're trying to collect. Impersonation on a social media web page, just think of Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. Hackers are becoming more clever to register or create a fake website of your brand to impersonate your company so that it can lure your customers to come to their website for them to perform, let's say, malicious acts. Raw applications, right? So think on copy apps on the App Store or on the Google Play Store that are all similar to your brand to fool people that when you do a quick search that their fake app is shown up to the top instead of yours, and that your customers or employees are downloading the wrong app. And counterfeit goods. So people are thinking to be fake goods so that they can make them look like legitimate, and then through these lookalike websites and third-party e-commerce platforms that they can sell this. So impersonation comes in different areas and different sizes, and it's very important to take a very broader view when it comes to brand impersonation. Phishing attacks, and this is something that we've seen as traditional phishing attacks, is something that is really known for the on the market today. And of course, we always have some clever new ways of phishing attacks. But as you can see on this graph, is that as much as we have invested in a lot of solutions to help us protect against phishing attacks, nonetheless, the volume of phishing attacks has increased. So here you can see from the last quarter between Q4 of 2021 up to Q3 2022, we've seen a steady increase and growth in phishing attacks. And the reason why it becomes growth is continuing is because the assets that we have is also increasing. So do keep in mind, not only the management assets that you say we only have around X amount of assets. No, think about the assets that your employees and other customers are using to access your resources. That is all also areas of attacks, and that's why we've seen also an increase of phishing attacks. So overall, 600 different brands were impersonated in phishing attacks in Q3 in 2022 alone, right? So there's more and more hackers that are looking to impersonate and your brand through phishing websites by copying your logo, your source code from your website and executing their attacks. Now, from all of this, right, 41% of the corporate security incidents involve phishing. So in general, we see phishing operation will continue to be the top pathway to compromise in 2022 and also in 2023 because it's just easy to execute and very cheap resources that needs to be done. Nevertheless, there's always areas to overcome that. This example here is just to show you a phishing website and just to give you an example of areas where you can detect phishing websites and solutions that help you detect a phishing website. So in general, phishing website, it has to have two main parameters of success. One, it has to contain a domain that looks similar to the targeted brand. and it has the source code, the web page has to have the similar template or layout of the targeted brand, right? That's the only way people will able to say, hey, wait a minute, this seemingly look very familiar as the bank that I normally do my internet banking every day. Now, these are areas where you can detect that, right? And a machine is able to do that for you. Is to be able to detect, first of all, the URL mention of the targeted brand, the targeted brand mentioned in the URL. And secondly, also the logo and the source code of being used of the original website is detected on this particular phishing site. With this information, these indicators, lookalike domain impersonation and misuse of logo, are key elements that you can look to detect phishing sites. Now, once these phishing sites are detected, the main use case that most of customers will want to do is have them taken down immediately to avoid any more disruption happening to their customers or the employees. One of the notable, let's say, changes and shift and trends we've seen in the last few years is informational stealers, info stealers. What info stealers do is, in this case here, information stealers would infect your system with a malware. Once your system is infected with a malware, it can then collect everything from your device, send it to a C2, and then afterwards sell it on to the darknet, as you can see here. So VDAR here, and there's someone here called Glasgow Dork, this is an example, is selling multiple credentials, and they're advertising them for as cheaply as $10, right? And some of them might have, let's say, different categories. As you can see here, the second one here has a diamond classification here based on the credentials. And here you can see the second one here has a platinum. And that has to do with some significant, let's say, notable domains that are seen here. So for example, a Gmail domain that is collected, or for example, something related to a loan or Netflix account, or for example, a banking account. These will get a high platinum, let's say, status, and will probably maybe charge a little bit more. What we see now with informational stealers is that they're coming in as a service, right? So there are threat actors that are offering different information stealers that you can purchase between, let's say, $150 up to $900 that you can deploy on your own. And you can target certain organizations, you can target certain victims, whoever you might feel necessary. And this model is quite attractive and lucrative for the threat actors, because if you look at certain ransomware groups, they might not have the time and investment to go and search or to build these solutions. So hackers are down creating these solutions to say, hey, I have an informational stealer. If you subscribe to my service and think on it like Netflix, you subscribe, we'll make sure that you got monthly maintenance support if necessary. And then you can use this particular service to target wherever you want to target. This is becoming more and more trend from different areas where we see stealers are being published as a service. Now, what a stealer basically would do, all right, and it's something that's already not overlooked, is that the type of malware that pretty much what it does is steal the data on the infected machine and then send it on to the attacker. And the type of data that we're looking at is your name, email address, username, passwords, which are all stored in your browser. If you store your credentials in your browser, phone number, home address, credit card details, browser history, session ID, authentication cookies, crypto, all of this, right, and more are collected from this malware and then shipped onto the C2 domain. Now, what we see for the away in 2022, that the top 5 most popular informational stealers is Redline. So if Redline beats the top here, together with Raccoon, Meta, VDAR, and others. And pretty much the other stream just represent 8% of the most information stealers. It's a lucrative business. It's really much maintained. Hackers can leverage this whenever they want to, and then have a guaranteed service to help them if they need any issues with the malware stealer. The life cycle of an information stealer is quite really straightforward. So the moment you purchase this on the dark web, you deploy it, you can target, you can create a malicious applications, target a certain brand. You could create a malicious website, for example, or a malicious attachment. So you have a different methods of delivery that you can use to target an organization. Now, once that's been delivered and that malware is installed on the device, it starts to steal the data and infiltrate and send it to the C2. Right. So once it's sent into the C2, you say, oh, interesting that I got credentials from, let's say, identity access management solution. I can take that and I can use that information and sell it to another threat actor on the dark web, as I've shown you before with the dark web marketplaces, or I can take that stolen data breach corporate information and target the organizations myself. A lot of hackers have taken the safe road by just doing the collection of these of this data because it's easy and they're not become very targeted. So there's easy business. They can just publish it, someone purchase it, and they can make a quick buck without having to go through, let's say, the route of a ransomware group where they know the chances are great that if they mess up, they will get caught. What you see here is an example of a Redline stealer, and this is here as well as using an example of here Wells Fargo. So Okta, for example, Okta sign-in, right? Okta, as you're probably familiar, is like a identity and access management solution that most organizations use to log in to their corporate environment before they can get access to the corporate business applications. And what you see here is that most companies allow you to just use your own device, but here we have an example where an employee is then infected with the credentials, namely Okta, also his Microsoft account, right? Username and password is collected, and also you can see here on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, is customer credentials from their bank, right? And you can see here, notably, is that what we see is that once the machine is infected, once this information is published, right? It's made it really quite quickly. So we tend to make sure that these type of red line stealers are published as quickly as possible, so that organizations can act quickly and in terms to mitigate the risk, whatever that may happen to them if these credentials are ending up in the wrong hands. What you also see, this is an example of a red line information stealer that's stealing the session cookie as well. So the session cookie is stolen, and that means that with the session cookie, I can bypass any MFA. So think on, for example, when I'm logging on my Gmail or I'm logging to my Office 365, once I'm logging into my system, I don't get a constant, authorization for, hey, you need to log in. So that session cookie lasts for maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, or maybe 24 hours, or maybe if you go on another device, you're forced to log in. But once you got a session cookie and that's stored in, if that's collected from your system and is injected in another system, that means it's persistent. You can still use it, and you can bypass the MFA solutions without any hassle. Now, what we see here in terms of all this information, there's like data leakage and exposed credentials. It's just marvelously it's in steadily increasing, right? The volume of assets, all of them doing means that more credentials are being collected. This here, for example, is just to give you an idea of how many malware logs has been discovered in the past 7 days. So over 150K malware logs have been discovered, and these are all targeted to multiple assets, right? So it can be from Netflix to Google to O3C5, and all coming from all over the world that are being collected. Just to show you how many malware logs are collected just on 7 days alone. Why these malware logs, or pretty much these InfoStealers, are very important, I'd like to go and talk about the Uber breach as an example. So the case study with Uber breach, if you're not familiar with it, is that a group of threat actors were able to obtain the credentials from an employee. And what the person did was simply took those credentials, log in to the system, and then spam the user with MFA notifications. So Here's just an example of how this whole trajectory went, how the step that the threat actor took to get to the corporate credentials, or pretty much the corporate credentials, but the crown jewels in this case, the PAM service with the admin credentials. So he bought the credentials on the dark web that was published on the marketplace. He spammed the user for VPN access. So the employee kept on getting a notification, hey, I would like to log in, right? Do you approve, yes or no? And the employee kept on clicking no. Person was fool enough to say, yes, we're from support. We saw the notification happen. Just click yes and it will go away. So the employee was convinced that, okay, now that I received some support from our internal IT support, I'll just click less when they happen. And I will click yes. What led to, when a person clicked yes on the MFA, provided access to that threat actor into Uber internal network. So what that threat actor did, they did a discovery of the scan intranet. They found a couple of PowerShell scripts where they were able to found on a network drive. They took those PowerShell scripts that contain admin credentials to the PAM surface, data escalation to authenticate to the PAM service, and they were able to get access to all the secrets from the PAM service. So from the domain admin to the MFA to the identity provider IDP, cloud admin, biz admin, all the credentials which are typically stored in a privileged access management vault were all collected within no time. And that hacker took that information, infiltrated out to the network and shared that out and explained exactly how he was able to get access. This alone, simply from a compromised credentials or organization that was well properly had a proper security in check, simply fell victim to a breach because they were targeted, or in this case, the threat actor chose the right person to target and just spam the person with the MFA notification, where eventually the employee click on yes, and that was sufficient enough for that threat actor to get in and target within and collect the relevant admin credentials from within the Uber intranet. Here you see just example of this, just log in, the simple as you can see, and within no time, that person credentials were, in this time, the credentials were used. Now you may say, again, these credentials is not a threat. Why should we care? These are not important. Let alone, MFA is not enough. Do recommend, there's a lot of ways of cookie session hijacking that can be done. If I explain, if I got the cookies, I can inject in my browser and I can bypass MFA. Example of this is showing you where threat actors are advertising these. I have bank logs with cookie session that can bypass to MFA. These are the employees, or we target, these are random banks in these countries. Here what we can do. Now, a simple example, if you use Azure, right, and you log into Azure, Azure doesn't really require you to log, let's say, back in after 2-3 hours. That particular cookie stays active for quite a long time. So basically, if you log in to Azure and a hacker steals these cookies, what users can do, what a hacker can do is they can go to the portal, in this example here, to Azure, enter the credentials, your username and your password, and inject the cookie inside their browser. And once they've done that, they can able to bypass MFA and they're in without no time. So there are security systems out there that has a cookie that can be persistent for 24, 48 hours, maybe even longer. And I know some people might say, well, we try to, reduce the amount of time that a cookie is valid, maybe to an hour, for example. But as you can see, even though if you do it like that, and the hacker is able to use a malware log to collect that cookie in no time, he still has about probably by 40, 45 minutes to still do a lot of damage to your organization. So nevertheless, you want to balance out, let's say, how valid those cookies are so that it can ease for your employees or customers to not be forced to be logged in all the time. But on the other hand, hackers are quite clever enough to bypass certain these areas in order to target their victims. The supply chain tax here, what you see here is that why it's becoming more and more important. Areas where we see that companies are not really focusing in on is the risk that it brings, right? So vulnerabilities in software and technologies from third parties, right? So everyone using business, everyone has application, Microsoft, use Windows, you use other application. These particular applications, whether if they're SaaS, on-premise, they all tend to have a certain vulnerability, right? Certain vendors out there don't have the investment or have not invested a lot in their security operations to make sure that they're fully secure. So while you're doing business with with insecure vendors, partners, and digital suppliers, it creates a risk for you as well. More importantly, breaches of trusted third parties that can hold your data or have access to your internal networks and systems, right? So third parties you do business with, if they got breached or whatsoever, what's the impact that it can have on you? Now we can see here with this, for example, this Fortune Go Anywhere zero-day attack. As an example, one insecure technology can cause hundreds of breaches. So this was a solution, file transfer solution offered by Fortran, where there was a vulnerability on that software, and their hackers were able to leverage that vulnerability to target, let's say, thousands of enterprises that uses this particular solution, right? So once the CVE was out there, of course, the hackers then were thinking, okay, how can we target certain organizations? What they typically do is scan to see which organization has this particular software, and then there they were able to see how far they can infiltrate any data from those particular organizations. Similar as well too with the GCX breach, the phone system breach with only 12 users, right? Similar situation. That was one thing notable. A supply chain attack targeting the customers of this phone system with only 12 users. So again, a solution that you're using, third party that breach that can happen, can also have a impact on your organization. Another example here, what we see here is like Toyota Global Supply Chain portal flaw. So to put hackers in the driver's seat. So pretty much what this do was a security researcher found a vulnerability in a SaaS app used by Toyota employees, and the researchers gained access to 14,000 accounts. And you might wonder, okay, including third party, you might wonder, okay, why is this so important? The accounts themselves, right? Again, this could be if you have let's say a lease with a third party lease company where you do business with, and your employees then in turn have acquired a lease car from this lease company, their accounts will be in this system, right? And if the accounts in the system, right, you're using a corporate email address because they have a lease contract with your company has a lease contract with the lease company, those corporate email address can be used for further targeted attacks. So these again, where hackers see these potential attack vectors, collect these accounts, and say, hey, these look like these are the organizations we can target with our phishing or our malware attack. Overall, when you look at these different attacks, we have to look at what we can do in order to mitigate these mitigate the risks. And when we focus on strategies, there's different areas that you can help enhance or help your customers or your employees to be more aware of ongoing attacks and how to mitigate those risks. So of course, you have continuous security awareness training, right? There's something that to enforce in your workflows to identify threats like phishing, lookalike domains, social engineering. Better visibility on data leakage, right? So when data is leaked, right, how quickly can we identify it belongs to our organization? Our typical organization has labels on their data before they're shared for third parties. Have a very much visibility of labeling system on confidential or sensitive information. Monitor third parties. So the trusted third party that you work business is always a party that you work and do business with. Monitor their internal security posture and see how that affects your organization. Monitor for web impersonation as well. So beyond your brand, not only your brand, but look for other areas where they can be disruptive and phishing sites could be created to lure employees or customers of yours to that third party or even to your own organization. And finally, use threat intel to monitor the malware logs. Don't use the malware logs. What you want to overall achieve in this whole, when it comes to the supply chain attack, is early proactive response, right? So the earlier detecting in the kill chain, the better. So when it comes to phishing attacks, reconnaissance, domain protection, weaponization, a phishing beacon. In other words, my asset, which is my website, is being copied, right? And it should be seen similar as a sensitive document in your organization, because a sensitive document in your organization is labeled, right? It's shared among certain people, but you always assume that it can be leaked, right? So you're very, very careful on how that information should be shared. Your website is publicly facing, that is your brand. When someone copies that brand, it's an infringement of your brand. So you want to have that detection like early as possible. Cyber and phishing beacon helps you overcome that. Once the brand has been let's say copied or used or abused in any way, you are notified before that even happened. And also impersonation as well. We create a social media web page to help be more friendly towards your customers. You want to be able to detect that. So that overall solution is where you need to have in place to detect these phishing attacks from early on. Another example is malware infections, right? This is another area where we're going to see more and more hackers targeting organization. You want to have that coverage from the deep dark web, collection of malware logs and leak credentials detection before they're even used. So there's areas that you can definitely do in order to collect these information as sooner and quicker as possible and eliminate any risk towards your organization. Coming back to my overall story and back to the traditional ASM, I've highlighted that the traditional ASM focused on your managed assets, but in reality, your digital footprint has increased. And it's a matter of you to accept that your digital footprint is much larger than what it was 2-3 years ago. More importantly, that even the assets that you think that you own, you don't own. Concretely, Salesforce, O365, cloud apps, you don't own them, but you do business with them. Your employees have their corporate credentials on them. So if they're affected, they affect your business. It's a disruption for the business. So we have to understand that when our corporate email addresses are being used, our assets has become more and more wider now. And we have to bring that in scope. We need a modern attack surface monitoring solution to look way beyond just only the managed assets, but the unmanaged assets, the third-party assets, the umbrella assets. Because whether or not, if you don't like it or not, that's where the hackers them are going to look at. They're going to look at those areas where they know, hey, these SaaS apps, they have some very good sophisticated security in place, but let's test that. Their targeting is becoming easy to target, especially when 4, 5, 6, 10, 30 hackers are targeting this organization, that they got to continuously protect their security operations, their security infrastructure against these particular attacks. Nevertheless, what you want to have is that your attack surface solution is broadly looking at everything. So not only the managed assets, but bringing in the digital risk, also the intelligence that are able to give you an informed decision of how we're able to be targeted by these threat actors. And once you have all of this in your overview, right, it becomes more and more easier to manage. So your traditional threat intelligence, open source, where you have a pool of access of data that everyone has access to, that you can search for your information, becomes more and more efficient when you focus on what is more important for you and how you can be targeted. So targeted intelligence, impactful intelligence is the area where you want to be focusing on in order to mitigate any risk to your organization. Now, the way how we do it here at Cyberint is, as I just explained, we want to improve your visibility and assets on threats. So you want to quickly eliminate real threats and reduce the risk. And how we do that is superior visibility. Again, we don't have a solution that's focused on only traditional assets that you manage. We look way beyond that. And when we bring those assets into the organization, customers are like, oh, I was not aware that they were using this particular solution. Well, now you know, right? And once you know that, right, we want to give you and inform you of impactful intelligence. So we're providing high fidelity intelligence that's tailored to your assets, right? So why is it important that you should be aware that this application that your employees are using is very dangerous? Not only because the credentials are leaked, but more importantly, that maybe this application is known for CVEs, or that via third-party report, that this this organization that leverages solution or sells this solution doesn't have a proper, let's say, way of managing the solution or have a good security policy in place to mitigate any risk towards their services they provided. That kind of information you want to have, and more importantly, you want to make it cost effective and resilient. You want to make sure that you detect and disrupt any threats fast and reduce time to saving the hassle of having to go pay an instant response team to come in and help you identify where it all went wrong, where we could just do this proactively and focus on that. So with more of that, what we all here is to detect and mitigate external risks with cyber and Argos. We have different pillars where you can focus on, whether it's the threat intelligence, the attack surface management, the digital risk, and the supply chain. But what our customers benefit from is that these are not separate modules. It's the wider net. So focus way beyond that and fusing this into one solution, you're able to detect, let's say, threats across from multiple areas where you can act faster, quicker, and able to mitigate those risks. And overall, the customers get benefits from the triage of the contextualized alerts. There's faster and effective way of taking it down. And of course, there's areas where we can do custom investigation and threat actor profile for you, any need that you have relating to any risk that's targeting your, that's related to your organization. So with that, I'm going to conclude my, my presentation, and I'm going to open it up for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Gino. Excellent presentation, really, really insightful. I see some questions coming in. So the first question, how does the takedown of the Genesis marketplace affect the attack surface for businesses? Do you have any insights on that, Gino?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, so let me just I think most people in the audience probably aware, but just to recap. So Genesis is one of the famous cyber crime, let's say cyber underground, was known for selling compromised accounts. But not only that, you could purchase a bot, for example, to deploy and target certain organization. It was rolled up last week by the FBI and a law enforcement agency. So what you see now is that with this forum going down, right, the services provided to threat actors or it's now being, let's say, it's not there anymore. Nevertheless, that doesn't stop them from going other areas, right? So you still have Russian market, you have still other forums that you can access to get these credentials. With the Genesis market now rolling up, it's just one party less. What I believe in what we're going to see is that a lot more hackers are going to try to look for, let's say, mediums that are not well known to the law enforcement. So think on Discord channels, Telegram channels, but try to make them private, all right? Private that is hard to get in. So if you look at Genesis was an invite only, started back in 2019. And I guess what has happened is that, and I don't know if the operators expect it to be that, high, but because of the digital transformation and the fact that ransomware groups are very successful in using initial access vectors, they kind of got a lot of popularity to say, hey, this is a good medium to get, free credentials, not free credentials, but purchase credentials that I can target an organization, do a ransomware, and then collect, let's say, X amount of Bitcoins from them. So we will see some disruption of it. I think the challenge is going to be where they're going to, spin up next. But nevertheless, I'm convinced that they'll probably start up another forum, and then they'll probably be similar to invite only, and they probably might focus on keeping it on a dark web. But again, something like this, for people that want to start it, you can make a very quick buck quickly, just being an initial founder from this forum, and then collect a lot of money, and then you can just duck out and then pass on the baton on someone else. So it's very something interesting to watch out in the next coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, one more question came in while you were answering the previous question. If attack vectors like phishing and leaked credentials are so common, why is this not covered by traditional ASM approaches? Which is a pretty valid question. What are your thoughts on that, Gino?
So I was like I explained like earlier in the slides. The traditional ASMs were built to focus on managed assets, right? So you have your internal assets, so everything within the firewall that you can scan. Mostly are done with vulnerability management systems. So you scan your endpoints and say, okay, which vulnerabilities are there? And ASM pretty much like does the same thing. So the shift became more like, okay, let's look at it from the outside, right? Right. Now, when you say from the outside, you're looking at outside in, looking at external attack surface solutions. So they took the approach of the typical, okay, let's scan on the IP, on a net block from the customer, and let's see what we can find. But if you flip the coin around, you could just do the same thing, right? You can search within internet, see which systems are publicly facing, right? And if taking that approach and look to see, okay, your system is running the symulane, old version of Windows. It's running this application known for CVEs. This port is open. Are you aware of it, right? So what a vulnerability management system we're coming short is where the external attack surface monitoring try to cover. Say, hey, this port is open. It's not really wise to have it open. And that was the focus area. Now the leak credentials and all that other stuff was just not beyond its scope. It was like, no, why would we scan a external port? It doesn't own by you. So that mentality of managed asset is something that a lot of organizations has to realize, that there's stuff that you own and there's stuff that you don't own. But at the end of the day, there are assets, your domains, that are being used to register an email. So your email at, cyberinc, is used to access, cloud solutions to do my day-to-day activities. And that's the area where most organizations will say, okay, if I want to see if it's a compromised credentials of my organization, let me focus on the TI. But however, TI focus more on a bigger, broader, it's not only about compromised credentials, it's about how these compromised credentials are being abused and compromised in the first place. So you have to trust in that. So it falls outside the bucket of the traditional ASM, and that's where we believe that the net of ASM has now become wider, and we have to focus on all the assets, right? And we have to consider digital risk and threat intelligence as well, to make an informed decision that if I see a server that's running an application on port 21 or any port, doesn't necessarily mean to say it's bad at the moment. However, if I look to my threat intelligence and I see, hey, someone just mentioned that a vulnerability, a 0-day has been exploited, and I see massive scanning being done throughout the world on this particular application, on this particular port, that should give me an informed decision to say, hey, let's try to block this port for now until we patch the system, and then we'll bring it back online. That informed threat intelligence decision out of the ASM solutions, what modern attack surface monitoring solutions should have. So a very, very long answer, but a very good questions, that it is something that a lot of organizations have to realize, that ASM is a lot more than just what you manage, but the stuff that you don't manage.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Gino, once again, and thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. Hope that this was a very useful and informative webinar for you. Keep an eye out later this week. We will share a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slides that Gino presented. And of course, feel free to reach out if you have any questions and would like to speak with someone from the Cyberint team. You can reach out to myself or Gino, and we will be happy to assist. So thanks once again to everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your evening. And thank you once again, Gino. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.